And Waldenbooks, the mall bookstore. Barnes & Noble absorbed. Picture walking through any American shopping mall in the 1980s or 1990s, and you'd almost certainly encounter a familiar sight. A cozy bookstore tucked between the department stores and specialty shops, its windows displaying the latest bestsellers and its narrow aisles packed with paperbacks. That store was likely Waldenbooks, a retail chain that for decades served as America's gateway to literature, transforming how ordinary people discovered and purchased books. Founded in 1933 by Lawrence Hoyt in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Waldenbooks began as a single newsstand but would eventually grow into the largest bookstore chain in the United States, with over 1,200 locations at its peak. The company pioneered the concept of bringing books to where people already shopped, making literature accessible to suburban families who might never venture into a traditional downtown bookshop. Hoyt's vision was revolutionary for its time: create small, efficient bookstores that could thrive in high-traffic retail environments, stocking carefully curated selections of popular titles rather than attempting to carry everything ever published. The name Waldenbooks itself was a masterstroke of branding, evoking Henry David Thoreau's contemplative retreat to Walden Pond while suggesting a company that understood both commerce and culture. By focusing on mass-market paperbacks, bestsellers, and popular magazines, Waldenbooks carved out a niche that seemed unshakable, becoming synonymous with casual book browsing and impulse purchases. The chain's success wasn't just about selling books, it was about democratizing reading, bringing stories and knowledge directly to Middle America in bite-sized, mall-friendly packages. The transformation of Waldenbooks from a single Connecticut newsstand into a retail empire began in earnest during the 1960s, when the company was acquired by Carter Hawley Hale Stores, a department store conglomerate with ambitious expansion plans. Under new ownership, Waldenbooks embraced the mall revolution that was reshaping American retail, recognizing that shopping centers represented the future of consumer behavior. The company's strategy was deceptively simple: secure small but prime locations in busy malls, typically spaces of just 1,500 to 3,000 square feet, and pack them with carefully selected inventory that would appeal to casual browsers and serious readers alike. This approach required sophisticated understanding of local demographics and reading preferences, leading Waldenbooks to develop one of the earliest computerized inventory management systems in retail. The chain's buyers became experts at predicting which titles would resonate with suburban shoppers, often ordering books based on complex algorithms that factored in local education levels, age demographics, and even regional cultural preferences. By 1968, Waldenbooks had grown to 87 stores, and the company was just getting started. The 1970s saw explosive growth as shopping malls proliferated across America, with Waldenbooks riding the wave by opening an average of one new store every week. The chain's success during this period was built on understanding that most Americans didn't want to spend hours browsing through dusty stacks of obscure titles. They wanted quick access to the books everyone was talking about, plus maybe a magazine or two. Waldenbooks delivered exactly that experience, creating a retail environment that felt both literary and accessible, intellectual yet commercial. The golden age of Waldenbooks coincided with fundamental changes in American reading habits and the rise of the modern publishing industry's blockbuster mentality. During the 1970s and 1980s, publishers increasingly focused on creating bestsellers through massive marketing campaigns, television appearances, and coordinated media blitzes, a strategy that played perfectly into Waldenbooks' strength in moving popular titles quickly. The chain became a crucial partner for publishers launching major books, with Waldenbooks buyers wielding significant influence over which titles would receive prominent display space in hundreds of mall locations simultaneously. This symbiotic relationship helped create some of the era's biggest literary phenomena, from Stephen King's horror novels to romance series that dominated paperback racks. Waldenbooks pioneered many retail innovations that seem obvious today but were revolutionary at the time, including computerized bestseller tracking, sophisticated point-of-sale systems, and detailed customer preference databases. The chain was among the first retailers to understand the power of impulse purchases in book buying, strategically placing magazines, bargain books, and gift items near checkout counters to increase average transaction values. By 1982, Waldenbooks operated over 900 stores and generated annual revenues exceeding $750 million, making it not just the largest bookstore chain in America, but one of the most profitable specialty retailers in any category. The company's success attracted attention from Wall Street and competitors alike, leading to its acquisition by Kmart Corporation in 1984 for approximately $300 million. Under Kmart's ownership, Waldenbooks continued its aggressive expansion, reaching its peak of over 200 stores by the late 1980s, while maintaining its focus on mall locations and popular titles that could generate high inventory turnover. The seeds of Waldenbooks' eventual destruction were planted during its most successful period, as changing consumer preferences and new competitive threats began reshaping the book retail landscape in ways the company failed to adequately recognize or address. The emergence of book superstores, led initially by chains like Crown Books and later perfected by Barnes & Noble and Borders, represented a fundamental challenge to Waldenbooks' small-format, limited-selection model. These new competitors offered something Waldenbooks couldn't match within its mall spaces: vast selections of titles, comfortable reading areas, coffee shops, and the kind of browsing experience that encouraged customers to linger for hours rather than minutes. The superstore concept appealed particularly to serious readers and book lovers who had always found Waldenbooks' selection somewhat limiting, despite the chain's efficiency and convenience. More troubling for Waldenbooks was the gradual decline of mall shopping itself, as changing suburban development patterns and consumer preferences began favoring big-box retailers and strip shopping centers over enclosed malls. The chain found itself increasingly tied to a retail format that was losing relevance just as new competitors were offering more compelling alternatives. Waldenbooks' attempts to adapt included experimenting with larger store formats and expanding beyond traditional mall locations. But these efforts often diluted the brand's core strengths without successfully competing with the superstores. The company also struggled with its relationship to Kmart, which was facing its own retail challenges and couldn't provide the investment and strategic focus Waldenbooks needed to evolve. By the early 1990s, industry observers were noting that Waldenbooks was losing market share to both book superstores and discount retailers like Walmart, which began carrying bestsellers at prices the mall chain couldn't match. The rise of online shopping, while still in its infancy, represented yet another threat to the impulse-driven, location-dependent business model that had made Waldenbooks successful. The 1990s marked the beginning of Waldenbooks' long decline, as the chain found itself squeezed between aggressive new competitors and the deteriorating economics of mall-based retail. Barnes & Noble's superstore expansion accelerated dramatically during this period, with the company opening massive locations that dwarfed Waldenbooks stores in both selection and ambiance, while also offering the kind of lifestyle experience that increasingly sophisticated consumers demanded. Borders joined the superstore assault with its own chain of large-format stores that emphasized extensive magazine selections, international titles, and cafe culture that made book shopping into a social activity. These competitors didn't just offer more books. They offered a completely different relationship with reading and book discovery that appealed to customers who had outgrown the quick browse experience of mall bookstores. Waldenbooks responded by attempting various format experiments, including larger superstore locations and partnerships with coffee vendors. But these efforts often felt forced and failed to capture the authentic browsing culture that made the superstores successful. The chain's traditional advantages, including prime mall locations and efficient inventory management, became less relevant as consumers increasingly planned specific trips to bookstores rather than stumbling upon them during general shopping excursions. More damaging was the rise of discount retailers selling bestsellers at prices significantly below what Waldenbooks could offer while maintaining acceptable profit margins. Walmart, Target, and warehouse clubs began treating popular books as loss leaders, selling them at or below cost to attract customers who would then purchase higher-margin merchandise. This pricing pressure forced Waldenbooks into an impossible position: match the discounters' prices and sacrifice profitability, or maintain margins while watching customers purchase books elsewhere. The chain's sales began declining in the mid-1990s, leading to store closures and reduced expansion plans, just as the book market overall continued growing. By 1995, Waldenbooks operated fewer than 1,000 stores for the first time in over a decade, and industry analysts were questioning whether the mall bookstore concept could survive the superstore revolution. The death spiral accelerated in the late 1990s and early 2000s as Waldenbooks faced the perfect storm of declining mall traffic, intensifying competition, and revolutionary changes in how consumers discovered and purchased books. The rise of Amazon.com, launched in 1995, initially seemed like a distant threat to mall-based retailers. But the online giant's combination of vast selection, competitive pricing, and customer reviews began attracting exactly the kind of serious readers who had been Waldenbooks' most valuable customers. Amazon's recommendation algorithms and user-generated content created a book discovery experience that was both more personalized and more comprehensive than anything possible in a small mall store. Traditional publishers, recognizing the shifting retail landscape, began allocating more of their marketing budgets and promotional support to superstores and online retailers, leaving mall chains like Waldenbooks with reduced access to exclusive titles and promotional materials. The chain's parent company, Kmart, was struggling with its own existential crisis during this period, filing for bankruptcy in 2002 and lacking the resources to properly support its specialty retail subsidiaries. Waldenbooks found itself caught between a parent company in distress and a rapidly evolving marketplace that seemed to be moving beyond its core competencies. The chain attempted various survival strategies, including partnerships with educational institutions, expanded gift and entertainment merchandise sections, and even experimental locations outside of traditional malls, but none of these initiatives generated sufficient revenue to offset the ongoing decline in core book sales. Store closures accelerated throughout the early 2000s, with Waldenbooks shuttering hundreds of locations as mall landlords struggled to find replacement tenants for the small, specialized spaces the chain had once filled profitably. The company that had once seemed synonymous with American book retailing was rapidly becoming a nostalgic memory, its remaining stores often appearing dated and understocked compared to the vibrant superstores that had captured the market's imagination. The final chapter in Waldenbooks' corporate life began in 2005 when Kmart, which had emerged from bankruptcy through a merger with Sears, sold the struggling chain to Barnes & Noble for approximately $125 million, a fraction of what the brand had been worth just 2 decades earlier. Barnes & Noble's acquisition of its former competitor was primarily motivated by the opportunity to eliminate competition and acquire valuable mall locations rather than any intention to revitalize the Waldenbooks brand. The purchase gave Barnes & Noble immediate access to hundreds of mall locations that would have taken years to negotiate independently, while also removing a competitor that, despite its struggles, still maintained relationships with millions of customers. For Waldenbooks employees and loyal customers, the acquisition represented the beginning of the end, as it became clear that Barnes & Noble intended to either convert the most valuable locations to its own smaller format stores or simply close them entirely. The integration process was swift and largely unsentimental, with Barnes & Noble focusing on extracting maximum value from Waldenbooks' remaining assets rather than preserving what had once made the chain special. Many longtime Waldenbooks locations were quickly converted to Barnes & Noble stores, complete with new signage, different inventory systems, and the corporate culture of their new parent company. The conversion process often eliminated the intimate neighborhood bookstore feeling that had been Waldenbooks' signature, replacing it with the more standardized experience that characterized Barnes & Noble's approach to retail. Within months of the acquisition, it was clear that Waldenbooks as an independent brand was living on borrowed time, existing only as long as it took Barnes & Noble to systematically absorb its most valuable assets. The irony was unmistakable. The mall bookstore pioneer that had once seemed destined to dominate American book retailing was being consumed by one of the very superstores that had rendered its business model obsolete. The final years of Waldenbooks were characterized by managed decline, as Barnes & Noble systematically closed locations, transferred inventory, and wound down operations with the efficiency of a company that had no intention of preserving its acquisition's legacy. Store closures accelerated throughout the late 2000s, with Waldenbooks locations disappearing from malls across America as leases expired or were terminated. The closures often left malls without bookstores entirely, as landlords struggled to find replacement tenants for the small, specialized spaces that Waldenbooks had occupied for decades. For many communities, particularly in smaller cities and suburban areas, the loss of their local Waldenbooks represented the end of easy access to physical books, forcing residents to travel longer distances to superstores or increasingly rely on online retailers. The chain's remaining employees faced uncertain futures as their stores closed, with some fortunate enough to transfer to Barnes & Noble locations, while others were forced to find entirely new careers as the book retail industry continued consolidating. Customer loyalty programs, gift cards, and other Waldenbooks-specific services were gradually phased out or transferred to Barnes & Noble systems, erasing decades of customer relationships and brand identity. The few stores that remained open into the 2010s felt like ghost locations, shadows of their former selves with reduced inventory, minimal staff, and the unmistakable atmosphere of businesses waiting to die. Industry observers noted that the Waldenbooks closure process was remarkably swift considering the chain's former size and market presence, reflecting both Barnes & Noble's efficiency and the complete absence of any viable path forward for the mall bookstore concept. By 2010, fewer than 200 Waldenbooks locations remained in operation, down from over 1,200 at the chain's peak, and even these survivors were clearly living on borrowed time. The brand that had once introduced millions of Americans to their favorite authors and helped define the suburban shopping experience was rapidly fading into retail history, remembered fondly by former customers but increasingly irrelevant to contemporary book buyers. The official end came quietly in 2011 when Barnes & Noble announced the closure of the last remaining Waldenbooks locations, finally ending a brand that had survived for 78 years and helped shape American reading culture for multiple generations. The final closures attracted little media attention, reflecting how thoroughly the brand had faded from public consciousness, even as its former customers continued buying books from other retailers. The last Waldenbooks stores closed their doors with minimal fanfare, their inventory liquidated through clearance sales that attracted bargain hunters more interested in discounted prices than historical significance. For retail historians and book industry veterans, the end of Waldenbooks represented more than just another chain closure. It marked the conclusion of an entire era in American book retailing, when small stores in mall locations could thrive by offering carefully curated selections of popular titles to casual browsers. The chain's death was ultimately attributed to its inability to adapt to changing consumer preferences, the rise of book superstores, online retailing, and the general decline of mall-based shopping, but the underlying cause was more fundamental. Waldenbooks had been perfectly designed for a world that no longer existed. The company's legacy lived on in the millions of readers who had discovered their favorite authors while browsing Waldenbooks' shelves, the retail innovations it had pioneered in inventory management and customer service, and its role in democratizing book access during the crucial decades when reading became a mass-market activity. Barnes & Noble's absorption of Waldenbooks was complete and irreversible, with the surviving company showing no interest in preserving its former competitor's brand identity or retail philosophy. The mall spaces that had once housed Waldenbooks were gradually filled by other retailers or left vacant, physical reminders of how quickly retail landscapes can change and how even the most successful businesses can become obsolete. The story of Waldenbooks serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of adaptation in retail, the dangers of being too closely tied to a single format or location type, and the reality that in business, past success provides no guarantee of future survival when fundamental market conditions change.